Hello, void and all who inhabit it. It's me, and Stephanie Robinson is, without a doubt, the best writer on this show. For the summer, I tasked myself with watching copious amounts of television, but in particular, I wanted to catch up with Atlanta similarly to what I did with Insecure last summer. 2016 was not a good TV year for me, so I missed a lot that has grown to be deeply impactful for both audiences and writers. Atlanta is one such show that I've seen a lot about, but I never really felt the pressure to watch until the batch of mixed opinions around season 3, plus my own personal goal of watching an entire TV series this summer. This isn't going to be a season-by-season review, but rather a questioning of the purpose of this series and the intentions behind its productions. Kinda. I don't know, girl. I watched the show and had some thoughts, and this is a collage of said thoughts. There are timestamps for chapters below. Please feel free to hop around. Before we jump into the nitty-gritty, there's 2 quick things I want to address. Firstly, I want to be very clear that I recognize that there is a specific audience that Atlanta is reflecting that does not necessarily include me. Atlanta is for the men struggling to set aside their pride to make peace with their perceived failure or actual need to change. Atlanta is for all the Lawrence sympathizers of the world. Atlanta is for the white fans of Donald Glover who were too young or too whack to watch the Chappelle Show. And that's okay. I don't need to feel perfectly reflected in something to resonate with it. Arguably, none of us do. That's what empathy is for. However, recognizing this does not negate that Atlanta is a show that's been lauded for its social commentary, which I am here to pontificate on. Secondly, Afro-Surrealism. I've seen this term pop up a few times, mostly by people referencing the show, not necessarily the creators describing it, but I think it's helpful to define it and have a clear understanding of what Afro-Surrealist art looks like as we move forward in this video. Afro-Surrealism, as coined by Amiri Baraka in an essay discussing Henry Dumas's work, refers to art that aims to expose the unconscious reality of human existence, similarly to Surrealism. However, unlike Surrealism, the Afro-Surrealist unconscious isn't solely dream-based, but also refers to the real actual function that all others or marginalized people experience, but which is pushed below the imperialized expectations of normality. D. Scott Miller wrote in his manifesto that the Afro-Surreal proposes that beyond this visible world, there is an invisible world striving to manifest, and it is our job to uncover it. Like the African Surrealists, Afro-Surrealists recognize that nature, including human nature, generates more surreal experiences than any other process could hope to produce. Embracing the metaphorical and the mystical, Afro-Surrealism is a genre wherein aspects of the Black aesthetic movement are made manifest by having the real and unreal exist side by side. It is similar to Afrofuturism insofar that Afro-Surrealism considers a decolonized, diaspora-centric form of creation, but unlike Afrofuturism, Afro-Surrealism focuses on the present. I want to circle back and highlight that Afro-Surrealism is often cited as being influenced by or born out of many artists who were creating during the Black aesthetic or Black arts movement of the 1960s and 70s. Toni Morrison is noted as an early and influential Afro-Surrealist writer, more so influenced by BAM than a part of it, and a key trait of all of Morrison's work. The reason why I'm bringing up Afro-Surrealism's roots in BAM is that she does not feature white people. She couldn't have given less of a f*** about whether or not her books were accessible to white people, because that was never the point. As Terry Francis points out in her essay, there is no prescriptive formula for Afro-Surrealism. However, a major cornerstone of Afro-Surrealism, of Afrofuturism, of post-decolonial literature in general, is to divorce creation from whiteness, from appealing to it, adhering to it, conforming to its structure. Find a way to embrace your existence without needing to filter it through whiteness. Create freaky Black art, as Miller would say. So when a piece pivots its focus to commenting on the construction of whiteness? Is it still Afro-Surrealist? Is it perhaps that a surrealist critique of whiteness can only occur through an Afro-Surrealist piece? Well, to answer either question, there's a few more layers to this onion we have to consider first. I caught one of FD Signifier's live streams a few weeks ago, and he said something along the lines of, if you are a Black artist with a sizable white audience, your product to that audience becomes Blackness. Donald Glover is a prime example of somebody who not only understands Blackness is his product, but wants to profit off of that provocatively. Not in a Candace Owens type of way, but in a former only Black kid in the room who grew comfortable with that kind of way. To many, Glover gives the impression of someone willing to profit off of his Blackness without having to care about Black people, wherein a lot of Black people think any care would be proven via partnering with a Black woman. I do not think partnering with a Black person proves shit, and in fact, hella anti-Black motherfuckers date exclusively Black, but I do think Donald Glover's perception as someone who enjoys performing for white consumption primarily is amplified by how he talks or avoids talking about Black women and has done so for years. But then Atlanta came out. I've only been to Atlanta once back in high school, and the thing I remember the most was the Coca-Cola Museum, so I can't speak to whether or not this show is a love letter to the city. But it is a shift in how Donald Glover is presenting his Blackness as a product. See life the way I see it is an ethos that can be so refreshing and resonant to people, but it can also be something that gets other Black folks off your back because you finally push beyond the poetic waxings of a stiff afro teased once by a Black girl in high school. Atlanta entered the zeitgeist as a show that felt authentic to many Black viewers, premiering the same year as Insecure with a similar premise. Down-to-earth, realistic portrayals of young Black people that aren't based in traumatic plot lines, but rather a comedic look at their struggle for stability and success. However, returning to our Afro-Surrealism debrief, I believe that some things get lost when internal conversations are structured for external consumption. In Atlanta, I think this becomes most prominent in the standalone episodes throughout season 3, with the season premiere being an example so strong I almost quit the show. 3 Slaps, as with many episodes in season 3, is inspired by a true story. I get the catharsis afforded in being able to imagine a different end, a safer end to those children's time with their foster parents. I don't want to negate the potential available in engaging with conversations this way either. A lot of viewers didn't know the story of Devonte Hart and his siblings until this episode, so there's some level of awareness gained by having this fictional interpretation of some truly horrific shit. On top of that, viewers, particularly white viewers, were pushed to confront uncomfortable feelings from the first scene, wherein a man we will later know as White Earn monologues about the concept of whiteness and how it is a false, flimsy thing that can be purchased. There's power in that message, right? But it is a message, a cautionary tale, an after-school special. You get me? Atlanta is no longer rooted in presenting Black life as it is and letting the girls who get it, get it. For example, there was space in 3 Slaps to make commentary about the Black parents who still believe that tough love is the only way to grow, who believe that you become stronger through the amount of times you can get beaten down and pop back up. I think if this episode was framed for Black people, the focus would have been to look at Laquarius' relationship with his mother, her relationship with her father, and how ultimately restrictive and detrimental certain mindsets around parenting can be. But in selling Blackness to non-Black viewers, the episode instead becomes a focus on condemning white savior behavior in a way that allows the 2 white women preparing to murder 4 children more screen time to talk about their actions than the Black mother whose child was taken away. We're going to talk about the portrayal of women more in depth later, but Laquarius' mom is another addition to a long line of shallow Black female characters in this show, whose portrayal feels particularly icky when you consider the layer of selling Blackness. What becomes really obvious about the pivot in season 3, especially if we are thinking about Black women's roles, is how often the impact of the episode is meant to be for the white viewers. The Big Payback is an episode about reparations entirely from a white man's point of view, and which dips back into that old familiar bag of the aggressive Black woman stereotype with Shaniqua. I think there's room to present a character that embodies the Sapphire trope in a way that both rounds that character beyond that and pushes the audience to analyze any annoyance they have towards her, but Atlanta does not do that. As for the focus on whiteness, Justin Bartha, who plays Marshall, said in an interview that he believes the first episode is the thesis of the season, this idea that white is where you are and it's when you are. I think this decision to focus on the deconstruction of whiteness feels particularly disgusting when we are considering the depiction of certain characters like Shaniqua within this framework. Like, there is some internalized anti-Blackness perhaps in the writer's room that needed to be deconstructed as well, alongside spending a season poking holes in the construction of whiteness. But on top of that, if that is the goal of the season, if Bartha is writing that as a thesis, what does it mean to have these conversations in a way that still relies so heavily or so happily on these negative stereotypes of Black women in particular? Now, do white people need to have conversations about how superfluous and destructive and fleeting whiteness is? Absolutely. Does it need to be through this show? Girl like this? I don't know. I don't write for Atlanta. I know that may come as a surprise, so I can't influence season and series arcs. But I will say, as a viewer, it's a bit disappointing to see the trajectory of this show, especially because it's not like structurally Atlanta got any less interesting. I think the dream anthology format that eventually bleeds into real life was really cool. But content-wise, it felt more and more like, again, Atlanta was becoming a show to educate white people. I'm going to compare Atlanta to Insecure a lot, just because they came out around the same time. But late last year, in 2021, Issa Rae shared in an interview that she got advice to feature her white character, Frida, more in the beginning of the show. And similarly to Toni Morrison, Issa Rae said, "Fuck that noise." Atlanta feels like Donald Glover got similar feedback, but instead of taking the path of Toni Morrison, he chose a path closer to TJ and Khalil from season 3, where he decided, yeah, I'm going to accept this. I will take these white people's money. But unlike those characters, he spun it and said, yes, I'll do it. I'll put you in my art, but only if I get to roast y'all. Additionally, This Is America came out, I want to say, within 2 weeks of the season 2 finale. I would not be surprised if positive reaction to that music video impacted the direction for season 3. Despite premiering nearly 4 years later, it would make a lot of sense to me if season 3 was chosen to focus on profiting off of white guilt, literally, after seeing how successful it could be with that music video. Is that the better choice? I don't think so. It feels like an easy way to get stuck in this cycle of doing things for and about and around white people when you could just avoid that. In season 3's pivot to satirize white guilt and privilege, we lose some of the satire of the Black characters' behavior from earlier episodes, which I miss mostly because I wanted to see if this show could grow to do that better. The historical use of satire to challenge political power has spread to mostly focusing on critiquing people's vices, but either perspective often comes with the intent to push for a shift. More and more often, however, satire is really just used to describe mocking any behavior by any person, with the purpose behind it being less clear. I know
it's not that deep,
or whatever, But with how often jokes are defended as being satirical, I believe that it is worth questioning what change is being encouraged or what behavior is being condemned through a joke. For the bulk of the first 2 seasons of Atlanta, the major crux of the joke often revolves around money, the never-ending need for it, the expectation of Black men to provide it, and the stress that can cause, the varying ways to obtain or lose it. Paired with that is the running theme of identity, as we mostly watch Earn and Al struggle to find their place, often through absurd experiences with other people struggling just the same, or who are so secure it is unsettling. However, there's a contrast in season 1 between the 2nd and the 7th episode that highlighted to me how easily this show could slip into not saying anything profound. And by profound, I do not mean new, but just substantive in a direction that doesn't feel like a potential step backwards. In Streets on Lock, Earn spends the episode in the county lockup waiting to get bailed out, during which we get scenes that flash a light on various issues in the prison industrial complex. The excessive policing that can lead to folks getting arrested multiple times for minor infractions, the lack of mental health care access that puts a lot of people in jail in the first place, the embedded violence in police reaction, the inherent incompetency of the whole system. The episode is doing a lot in a very short amount of time. One of the scenes includes a man being super excited to reconnect with his ex-girlfriend who is also in lockup. It starts off similarly to another reconnection that happens earlier in the episode, but the major difference is that in the midst of this new guy's excitement, the other men in the room start laughing at him. His ex-girlfriend is trans, as evident by the fact that she was forced into the men's section, and the other men in the room mock the new guy, calling him gay while also misgendering the trans woman. I think there's something to be said about the show's choice to filter this interaction in a way that focuses on the embarrassment of the ex-boyfriend, a reaction that pushes a lot of men to murder the trans woman they are partnered with, and not through the men directly reacting to the woman, but I'm probably not the person to unpack that. I will say I think it's really fucking weird that so many viewers only had the reaction to laugh at this scene, because it's a rare moment where the show is actually looking at cis heteropatriarchy and maybe potentially trying to critique some of the toxic behaviors that men hold of other men, let alone the transphobic behavior that they are exhibiting towards the woman. But then I got to Ban, and I started to think I was giving the show more credit than it is worth. In BAN, I said Ban, but girl, work with me here. Paperboy is invited as a guest on a public access television talk show after he makes a controversial tweet about Caitlyn Jenner. It's a typical
"let's have 2 people with warring opinions argue for an hour"
setup, as the other guest is fictional transgender activist Dr. Holt. Her behavior is giving very much cancel culture boogeyman archetype. She uses the buzzwords, she has the inflection of concern. She's really annoying, which makes it easy to take Paperboy's side. And here's the thing. I do think we should be critical of this growing, low-key puritanical form of liberalism that cares more about completing the right performative steps than nuance. But people like Dr. Holt are pulling from legitimate social theory that we also should be applying to the harmful behavior and mindsets that we all hold. Regardless, in the end, Dr. Holt's argument is diffused because she quickly agrees with Paperboy on the importance of First Amendment rights, which the right to free speech is not a carte blanche from criticism, but whatever, and because a third transracial guest, whose experience Dr. Holt wants to compare to being transgender, turns out to be transphobic. The episode ends with Dr. Holt looking like a fool and Paperboy being validated in his unwillingness to reevaluate his behavior or even engage in conversation. The point of the satire is to make Dr. Holt and Franklin Montague, the host, look like heads. I get that. And my extreme annoyance with the cancel culture boogeyman is a whole separate train of thought. But I still think the jump between Streets on Lock and BAN illuminated a major gap in the show to me. I think Atlanta has a limit in its satire that can lead to ignoring layered commentary in order to keep the message focused on Black men, or in worst cases, to punch down. To a certain extent, it's fine that this show mainly focuses on Black men. Those are the main characters, that is the creator, that is a bulk of the writer's room. But the scope is getting narrower as we go on. For example, there's some iffy commentary in season 3 with regards to how the show talks about other artists that feels more like a lecture than a satirical moment. At first, I was feeling that perhaps the show was unwilling to laugh at itself, at the absurdity in the main character's decisions beyond Darius. But I think it's more so an inability to examine the flawed behavior of those most reflected in Earn, the center protagonist. Al is really the only character whose flaws we get to see consistently explored in a kaleidoscope of ways, but that exploration is often only connected to grief and fame. The episodes Barbershop, Woods, and New Jazz all spend time with Al in a way that looks at his fears and insecurities, and they are great, but again, it's a small scope. Namely, we don't also see the consequence connected to any negative behavior of anyone, not just Al, unless it's connected to money. The exception is the strain of Al and Earn's business relationship on their friendship. If we look at an episode like North of the Border, when Earn has them room with a student to save money and she has a volatile reaction after seeing Al talk to another woman, the consequence is Violet chopping up their shit and Earn losing his laptop. The immediate consequence is still only connected to money and the impact on the business relationship. Earn is punished for trying to cut corners, but any emotional impact from their experience with Violet is non-existent. Any critique of trying to profit off of a groupie situation beyond the reflection on Earn's struggle as a manager is unheard.
Well, those things are still worth examining.
Yeah, sure, they absolutely are. But when the examination keeps morphing into a way to scold someone else, or to punch down, or to avoid self-reflection, eventually I'm going to question why the butt of the joke is positioned as someone to laugh at in the first place, especially when the jokes have a pattern. Just to cover my ass here, I really like episodes like Woods or The Jacket that show a more vulnerable, more scared and uncertain side to the main Black male characters. Diverse portrayals of Black men are not only immensely important, but a great part as to why people weren't feeling the season 3 one-shot episodes, in my opinion. Seeing Black men be vulnerable is more revolutionary and engaging and refreshing than white people struggling to unlearn whiteness, although they also need to do that. But again, I think Atlanta really struggles at making their main target audience, the Earns of the world and the writer's room, take a glance at their own harmful behaviors beyond looking for a punchline. Case in point, a lot of the women in this show, especially Van, are presented as transactional. Many of the women we see want something from the men, often money, or they only exist to provide something for the men, often motherly energy or some pum-pum, if not both. Now, there's a lot of characters that want something from the main cast. That's the major theme of season 2, right? It's Robin's season for a reason. Everybody has needs that clash and intersect. But beyond the dozens of faceless fans recognizing Paperboy, we get to meet men like Willie and Tracy and even f***ing Prescott, who, yes, want something from Alfred and Earn and Darius, but they are also rounded in their appearance, whether it be for one episode or a whole season. That is not the same for the women Earn and Alfred meet at the club, or the girl that falls out of the back of the car screaming in the season 2 premiere cold open, or Christina in Helen, or Tammy in Champagne Poppy, or Lorraine in New Jazz, who are solely a plot feature, at best driving forward the story if not just existing for the opportunity for the show to say something, maybe. I would not be a black femme reviewing Atlanta if I did not talk about the Champagne Poppy episode, but before that, I have to once again bring up Woods. The episode is not only one of the best in the series, but it also features one of the best written side female characters in Sierra. Sierra is a friend of Al's who he is clearly from, and budding Instagram somebody. She's also kind of an asshole, most evident in how she treats the woman at the nail salon. Their date dissolves into an argument after Sierra keeps pushing Al to collaborate with her as a social media unit. What I like about Sierra, what I think is unique about her in comparison to so many other throwaway female characters in this show, is that she's not just a shouting head attached to a rolling neck, a soothing voice emitting from a pair of boobs, or a set of acrylics attached to a hand grasping at a wallet. Sierra is a chaotic force, much like Willie or Tracy or even fucking Prescott, whose orbit bumps into Al's but is not dependent on his. The weight of her interaction with Al exists beyond any immediate gratification or lack thereof. Even with the satire of her behavior, her existence has a point that's not just,
Ha ha, aren't females so volatile?
When I am looking for characters that aren't just plug-and-play stereotypes, it doesn't mean I'm searching for perfect characters, but rather interesting people with depth. I think it's really important that while Sierra isn't particularly likable, while she is flawed, she also clearly has goals and a strong understanding of how the system she's chosen to enter into works. At the end of the episode, when Al stumbles into a gas station parking lot, Sierra is proven right. Even bloodied and dazed, Paperboy is recognizable by fans. Al is not normal anymore. And not only is that something he chose by proxy of pursuing a music career, that's something he has to adapt to. Adaptation to and acceptance of his public persona play a major role in his arc for the entire series, but particularly in season 2. And this next step is sparked by his interactions with Sierra. A garnered awareness that is filtered through a female character's life view, not through her showing up as a hallucination or a fairy godmother, so rarely happens in this show. In fact, it's kind of funny how female-focused shows are capable of writing multiple men as rounded and dynamic, but male-focused shows can only do that with one woman who has to be romantically connected to a main character. Champagne Poppy, which immediately precedes Woods, is a masterclass in this struggle. Set on New Year's Eve, Van spends the night with 3 friends at a party allegedly hosted by Drake. Van's goal for the night is to get a picture with Drake so she can flex on Instagram, especially after she sees a post of Earn with another woman. Minus a small detour where she has to escape from an overly friendly guy with no boundaries, Van's focus does not waver from getting that picture even when she's meant to be looking for Nadine. Nadine, high as giraffe pussy on an edible that was aggressed upon her by Tammy, is one of Van's friends who ends up stumbling to the pool and spending the night chatting with Darius about how we all might just be living in a simulation. Candace, who immediately ditches the crew to spend the night with a barber named DJ, is posed as another somewhat bougie, somewhat vapid friend of Van's. Sidebar: between Candace, Jade, and Christina, all of Van's friends from pre-mommy life are similar in being bougie and vapid, and it makes me really wonder who Van was before Lottie. I think there's room to explore how the major responsibility of having and raising a child has zapped Van of her social life, but that isn't always the frame placed on her friendships. It feels like we're either supposed to imagine that her entire personality shifted after becoming a mother, or that Van is quote-unquote one of the good ones in a field of phony fake bitches. The second perspective is particularly funky, but neither option is great if the show leaves Van hollow, which it often does. Anyway, back to Champagne Poppy. The fourth and final friend is Tammy. Also high on an edible, but seemingly handling it better, Tammy hunts down this dude whose relevance is unclear beyond the fact that Tammy wants him. The most damning scene of this episode, the one I think people are most likely to reference when pulling apart this show's inability to write any woman, but particularly black women, occurs when Tammy mean mugs the white lady who showed up with the random dude she's interested in. There's a lot to unpack here. I was reading a lot while watching the show and saw that this episode has been praised for critiquing beauty ideals and negative effects of social media. Given the simulation conversation, the critique of fakeness that's woven throughout, and the end reveal that the Drake everyone is taking a picture with for Instagram clout is a cardboard cutout. However, the claim of Champagne Poppy being a perception-shattering episode falls flat for me for a myriad of reasons. For one, the critique of social media felt really shallow given it could basically be reduced to,
look at all these dumb thoughts trying to get a picture with Drake.
There are several one-liners disparaging how fake many of the women at the party are, with little consideration to a deeper motivation that may push someone to act a certain way, like what we get to see with Willie and Alligator Man, for example. Within Atlanta, there's nuance provided to considering how men construct and reconstruct their identities, the public personas they may put on and shuck off. But for women, similar behavior is boiled down and conflated as frivolous actions, all being rooted in the same shallow, stupid reasons. For example, all of these women's storylines are directly connected to men. The whole friend group is motivated by doing something to curry romantic favor and or attention. It's a weird clash because so much of the commentary being made in the episode about the things people will do for widespread acceptance and social currency dilutes the fact that the characters we are following are each warping themselves for the immediate validation from one specific person. They are shuffling around a mansion in hospital booties to get attention from a single man that they already have in mind, not a random assortment of followers, without even acknowledging that all of these women have their motivation reduced to the same root. It is worth acknowledging that there is a difference in seeking individual attention versus group attention. The exception is perhaps Nadine, but even in a marijuana-fueled haze that could have led her to do anything, she ends up having an existential conversation with Darius, of all people. I don't want to lean on the idea that, well, it's absurd, it's surreal, that's why he's here. Because there's tons of absurd shit that could have happened, and they chose a path that gave Darius more screen time than Candace or Tammy. Given that Champagne Poppy is bookended by Teddy Perkins and Woods, two character study episodes that barely feature the other main cast, it feels lazy that Van couldn't have her solo episode to herself and her friend group this season. Also, is there a media litmus test for whether or not a woman can have a storyline divorced from a man? Not even can she have a conversation with another woman without talking about one, but just can she move through the world without a man being her main objective or outcome? While you're chewing on that, let's get into Tammy. Sticking with the alleged perception shattering for a second, there's a few articles describing her infamous scene as an example of an assumption being altered because Tammy's proven wrong when the white lady barks back. I might be willing to agree with that read if there was any follow-up on Tammy for the rest of the episode. For example, after MK's assumption of Darius's attraction, which is a season later, but work with me here, the reaction to MK's behavior reverberates for the whole episode. Even though the focus of that storyline is weaponized white wokeness, there is a narrative reason for MK to act that way. Tammy, who is called Terry in a bunch of articles for some reason, has no such impact on herself or anyone else. Her scene is less of a shattered perception and more so a random opportunity to dunk on a well-known frustration of black women. Nothing comes of it plot-wise beyond the couple and perhaps the audience immediately reading Tammy as behaving out of pocket. Which, to be clear, she was. But what the fuck does her frustration have to do with the theme? Tammy has next to no reason to feel attached to whatever his name is beyond following his career. There could have been a critique of parasocial relationships fans have with celebrities that intersected with the commentary about online personas that was allegedly happening throughout the episode. However, while overlapping, that's a different conversation from what is the actual focus of the scene, which is more so Tammy's sense of ownership, or at least belief that she should have access to a black man over a white woman. What veneer of falsity, what desire to flex on social media, what aspect of Tammy or the white woman's public mask is truly deeply shifted by this interaction? Atlanta does this a couple of times. Again, the other blatant example is the start of Darius's storyline in The Old Man in the Tree, where it feels like someone is projecting their own insecurity and history onto characters to make a point for themselves. There's no deeper exploration into these interactions, or in MK's case, the deeper exploration has nothing to do with them. The interactions seemingly just occur for someone behind the screen to feel validated, which I think would be fine if they weren't so fucking cringy, and if this wasn't a show that claims or is believed by viewers to be a bastion of social commentary. What shocked me about Tammy's scene wasn't even her behavior, because they set her up from the jump to be unnecessarily angry and aggressive about everything, so I was prepared to be exhausted, but rather the white lady's message to the viewers at home. Hello? Are you there? I'm projecting. This is also why I brought up Satire's purpose earlier in the video, because it's really worth asking, what is the point of embarrassing this black woman character in this moment? If Satire is meant to comment on systemic issues, societal trends, widespread vices, why is the choice to dunk on Tammy and not the legions of black men who rival John Mayer in their dating practices once they get money, if not before then? Better yet, ¿por qué no los dos? Like, if you really have to scratch the need for a stereotype itch, why can't you simultaneously do some self-reflection? I know this section of the video might bring in the divestment crowd, so I just want to make clear that I am not espousing support of what they got going on over there. I simply believe that from the bougie, conventionally attractive women, to the angry, pushy, loud women, to the polished, swirl-loving women, and the very little in between, it seems that several someones are using writing in place of therapy. I'm hesitant to put Monique and Jade here because they are aspects of Van's storyline and a bit more fleshed out, but for better or for worse, they do fall into familiar, limited archetypes for women in this show. I think if they existed independently and other women like Christina or Candace or Violet or Tammy were written differently, I wouldn't rope them in, but there are clearly some repeating traits that I want to count the first time I saw it as well, even if those characters were better constructed. At this point, y'all have enough money to go see somebody talk this out, process this shit. Maybe after that, it'd be easier to write compelling characters instead of just caricatures of what your experience with black women has been like. Just a thought. The other thing that shocked me about Champagne Poppy was learning that Stephanie Robinson, the only woman in the writer's room at the time, was getting a lot of flack for how poorly that episode was written and how poorly the show handled writing women as a whole. Beyond the fact that Robinson did not write the Champagne Poppy episode, that reaction is especially fucked when you consider that the few episodes wherein female characters are well written, where Van's emotional depth is explored, where there can be a goal that's not directly connected to men, it's likely an episode that Stephanie Robinson wrote. Peep the credits and you'll find that the most shallow depictions of women are almost all products of male writers, which is unsurprising, but still disappointing. In that same interview, Robinson also mentions not wanting to be seen as the voice of Van. It's a reasonable concern that as the only person in the writer's room who can provide a different perspective, you wouldn't want to get pigeonholed into only doing that. However, it's definitely possible for writers' rooms to function without said limitations. Not to casually bring up Insecure again, but in Insecure, Lawrence was expanded as a character in great part due to Prentice Penny's push for a male perspective. The depth of Insecure's writer's room allowed Lawrence's arc to be explored by nearly any writer. Atlanta is seemingly only capable of rounding out its lone female character when she is in episodes written by someone who for the first 2 seasons was a lone woman in the writer's room. Van is initially presented and perceived as someone who primarily wants money, or at times attention, from Earn and little else. Despite losing her job, trying to get Lottie into private school, and struggling to retain friendships, her growth is sparse, relegated to lone episodes that drop the thread as soon as it's woven. Season 3 finally addresses some of the stress placed on Van, presenting her as this ephemeral manic pixie dream girl that the season finale finally cracks open to reveal it's Depression Babes. Unsurprisingly, the finale was written by Stephanie Robinson. It feels that at most opportunities to present a Black woman with an impactful storyline as rounded, Atlanta drops the ball. Unless the episode is written by Robinson, and that shouldn't be the case. I think the writers of individual episodes carry a level of responsibility for sure. But if there is anyone catching heat for Atlanta's portrayal of Black women, it's Donald Glover. And I'm not sure how unfair that is. I had a whole section of this video entitled Deifying Donald Glover that got chopped, but illustratively, as a result of how he entered pop culture, Glover has an in with the stiff Afro community and with Earn-adjacent Black men. However, he also has a deep white fan base, from nerdcore consumers to community diehards and beyond, that provides a level of attention that can be both beneficial and draining. When it comes to social commentary, I feel like Donald Glover can lean on the benefit of the doubt provided by his white fan base, and more recently, from the Black men who see themselves in his show, but are similarly unwilling to do some self-reflection or at least detach themselves from harmful perceptions as a defense against most critique. These people get the vision, so that's enough. Glover has a long history of being questioned about how he navigates race, constructively and disparagingly, and he has for just as long dodged those conversations, usually through deflecting or dismissing the questions lobbed at him. With all of this in mind, perhaps Atlanta was always going to be a show that would present commentary that was edgy, but still coddling to a certain point. Very much continuing the trend of establishing a controversial conversation that is then not engaged with other than to receive praise or demean critics. I also think that Atlanta's drive to satirize white behavior, especially the further you go in the show, was low-key an inevitable result of having an audience of white people and Black men who would watch the series without critically thinking of themselves. To me, there's an underlying need to prove oneself in this show that drives the content thematically, yes, but also perhaps the people behind the scenes. A lot of the exploration of success and identity construction and social capital and positionality are occurring within the pressure of white supremacy, and that's real. But to be unable to describe your experience, though it may include interacting with whiteness without needing to filter it through whiteness, feels a bit contradictory to Afro-Surrealism. The Season 3 pivot and the series-long combination of habitual misogynoir with willful self-reflective ignorance at times reads like an active decision to continue to operate within the same systems being condemned, which is also real. This is not an independent production. There are multiple people that must be satisfied, and that can mean certain messages get edited, because without that, the show does not go on, literally. However, the voice of this show is souring, perhaps was always going to be sour, when they choose to have a strong focus on critiquing another's privilege that, again, needs to happen, without taking a moment to unpack that of the central characters. Maybe an unspoken aspect of satire is that in presenting a critique or commentary, you are establishing yourself as an authority in ways that inherently means you refuse to acknowledge the limits of your own reach. You can stretch beyond boundaries while ignoring the inability to double back. But Afro Surrealism almost demands a focus on the self, that you put a mirror to the everyday and recognize the absurdity inherent in your existence. Does that reflection only apply to your surroundings? Maybe, even in the surreal, there is the ultimately logical individual. Those capable of noticing the overlapping layers of bullshit are the only blip of stability in the world. But wouldn't such a person recognize the absurdity in themselves as well? Wouldn't they want to? If you made it to the end, thank you for making it to the end. If you are an illustrious member of the Patreon, thank you for supporting me and the channel. Do you watch Atlanta? Did you start it when it premiered, or did it take you a while? How do you feel about the third season in particular? This outline took so damn long, and this is my second time recording this because the first time when my camera was on, the mic didn't pick up. So I might be skewed. I might be a little extra salty today. Girl, sorry. But I do like aspects of this show. The season 4 teaser trailer thing came out while I was writing this, and I am excited for the return of the invisible car, you know? We have to like things in order to care to comb through them, right? Allegedly. So I hope this didn't come off too bitter, but also menacure. Okay. Now that everyone who doesn't care is gone, quick personal update. I can't remember where I posted where, but I've moved again. You would know if I had video on, but again, my computer hates me. Also, school is starting soon, so I'm about to be more elusive than a government stimulus check. If you'd like to keep up with me when I'm not rambling in my hallway vanity, at my child, you can follow me on Twitter and Letterboxd for free, or join me over at the Patreon. On Patreon, it's really easy for me to do shorter, less structured podcast episodes, somewhat like this. I've already read a book this month, so that'll be the next review. I also just watched Bodies, and I have thoughts that might not be public, so we'll find out. We'll see. Additionally, I want the Patreon again to be a place where y'all, as the viewers, as people who care to support, can have a bit more input in the content as well. And hopefully by the time this video is up, there will be a poll there for people to vote on September's content. So if you're interested, check it out. No pressure though. Anyway, speaking of September, I would like to have this video up before then, so I'm going to stop talking now. Until next time, stay safe. I'll catch you in the next echo chamber.